watching us go work through this. We're going to start as of right now. So,
Yes.
Hey there, everyone. I'm Chris Dobbin, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the Amplify Your Brand live stream and the ultimate live in building a powerful brand and working in the digital age that we live in today. Along with my fellow friend and brand expert, Samoa there, we are here to share expertise and help you take your brand to the next level. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or a marketing professional, or someone who's trying to get their personal brand off the ground, this is the ultimate live for you. So it's packed with practical insights and strategies that will help you amplify your brand and stand out in the crowded digital landscape. So get ready to take notes and put what you learn into action. Because at the end of this live stream, you'll have a clear roadmap of how you build a brand that truly resonates with your target audience. So I look forward to working with you in this live stream on finding other ways to amplify your brand. And this week we have an interesting topic where we're talking about who you aspire to be like and why this is important. And I guess, Samoa, like insights to kick us off on why this is important.
Yes, when you understand who you are and what you stand up for, you become a much more resilient brand, person, business, and this is why we cover at length the topic of purpose, and we have taken a few sessions to revisit from different angles this very ample topic. And let's get right into the slides because we have a few things to cover today. And the first one takes us to the very important question.
Actually,
Who do you aspire?
We'll touch on the first thing. One of the reasons why we go through the steps we're going through is we are building this on our P8 program. And we are currently in the purpose because it's what we kick off with all clients around the process of understanding if they know where they're going and why they're doing it, then that will amplify their brand. And these sessions we've been going through are some of the key aspects of it. It's not everything we do. It's just a good over-leveling, arching overview of what we do and how we go about it to help you amplify your brand. So if that's something of interest to you and you would like to go deeper into understanding your brand, we would love you to reach out to us and talk about how we can help you take you through the P8 program and get your brand to amplify it as far as we can. So I will now pass back to our man and he will talk about the topic he was just getting passionate about. So talk to me about that.
Who am I? Very, very universal question. Very, very deep. And why am I wanting to be that person? What does that person feel like, sound like, react, do? What is life under that entity that we aspire to be like?
Okay. All right. So I will talk. Is this where I talk to the slide, my friend? So we're talking about brand identity versus brand image there.
Well, we have one before this one. No, we're going into the introduction.
Yeah. Okay. So in branding, it's important to identify who the brand aspires to be like because it helps you shape your brand's identity and position in the market. And there's that graphic, as you can see on the screen there. Understanding these two things and how they come together to develop your brand helps you desire image and reputation, and your team can work towards creating a clear and consistent brand message that resonates with the target audience. So knowing who your brand aspires to be like, it helps create a benchmark for success. It enables your branding team to measure the progress and assess whether you're on the right track. We'll obviously work through that in the next couple of slides on what those questions are and what that means. But by setting these goals and objectives, it's based on a desired brand image that your team wants to work towards. So it creates the brands that are both effective and successful. Additionally, it identifies who you want the brand to aspire to be and how it differentiates the brand in the competition. So by understanding your target audience, actually I'll leave that because that's something we're going to talk about at the end of it. So
at the end of it, really, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So right now, I just wanted to take this moment to walk you through the graphic that we have on the screen right there. We're looking at brand identity. We're looking at brand image on the right-hand side. And right in the middle, we have brand. It is far too often that we use intertwinedly each one of them as if they're the same, but actually understanding why they're not the same and where they go in the process will make a better brand at the end. So what is a brand identity? So this refers to the set of characteristics and features, that like your values, attributes, and visual elements that distinguish the brand and differentiate it from competitors. It encompasses elements such as the brand name, the logo, the tagline, the brand colors, the typography, brand voice, values, personality. It's an intentional and strategic representation of the desired image of what the brand wants to put out. This is very key in understanding how we identify who we want to be like or who we aspire to be like. The brand identity is developed internally by the brand people, brand strategists, the people inside the brand. It's a strategy behind putting out a product or a service for that brand. The brand image on the other side is the perception that consumers have of that particular brand. It is shaped by their experiences and interactions. So it's really creating a perception in your audience's mind, which is formed by their interactions and their touch points with the brand, their exposure to its marketing, to its products, customer experiences, etc.
Yeah.
It's influenced and managed by the consistent message, marketing efforts, and delivery on the brand promises. So it's much more external and opinion formed than the strategic positioning that you want to create internally, so that when these two come together, and this is the interesting part, and where we understand how brand identity differs from brand image. What happens in the middle is actually the process that we call brand. It's that result of what you strategically tried to put out with what was perceived, and now it's actually crystallized into the brand.
Yeah. To give one example, we had with a client last year when we were working through this, and they identified that their brand persona was, I'm trying to think of the actor.
Yes, your
Hugh
Aussie.
Jackman. Yeah, Hugh Jackman. Right. Now, what's interesting about Hugh Jackman as an actor is a lot of his characters on screen are heroic, like mean, edgy. Like he's a very different person in life as it was to being on the screen. So when we worked through that client, we had to talk about the fact that it had to be the person offline. Like it wasn't the actor on screen. It wasn't his persona there. And what's interesting is none of us have sat down and had a beer with Hugh Jackman and got to really know him. But there is a public persona that we think of him as this really nice guy that's quite accommodating.
Down to earth.
Down to earth. Someone, if you could have a beer with him, he would just happily have a beer with you and you'd be able to talk all day about whatever topic comes up. I don't think he comes across as a closed, person that just
arrogant, standoffish kind of personality. He feels approachable. At least that's the perception that we have, generally speaking.
And if you can find that example within your process that we take you through to identify that, you can then ping that up on the screen and then have a chat with your team members and even your clients and potentials and say, does this resonate with who we are? And if you get the majority of yeses from that process, then you know that you're onto something, and then you do have a foundation to build on. So that's like, you can always say to yourself, what would Hugh do? And you can take action. And it's that kind of simple thing. So that's hopefully just a good example of when we talk about aspirations. But there are other versions of this, and we'll talk through that as we go through the different slides that we're just about to go through. So on that, I think we should move on.
Yeah.
And that is brand identity. So starting by clearly defining your brand's values, personalities, target audience, and unique selling points, understanding these key elements will provide a foundation for identifying the right sources of inspiration. Now, we've talked about this in previous episodes. So if you're not sure what any of those things are, please go back and look at previous episodes where we go deeper into what brand values, why your target audience and USP is important. And you can then come back to this episode and build on what we're talking about in this. But back to you, Sim, on I guess we don't need to go too deep into it, but is there anything you'd like to talk about with that? I think you've kind of touched on that in the slides earlier that we just talked
Yeah, I
about.
did. It's really about knowing who you are before you try to know others, because you just stand your ground much more firmly before you go out.
Yeah. So what we didn't talk about in depth was obviously this point, which is analyzing your industry. So, look at your research in your industry and identify what makes brands in your industry successful, and how can you align with your goals with that target market, and look for companies that have similar brand positioning or similar target audiences to yours, and fast track your learnings on how should your brand go about communicating with that same audience in your way. And because your way is going to be different, because the DNA of how you've built your business and the core values and all those things, you shouldn't look the same as your competitors. We'll find that point of difference, but you should learn from it and go, that's working for them. How can we do it in our way?
Yeah, this is very, very interesting. And today's session in its entirety is interesting in the sense that it reinforces one thing that is very intrinsic to human nature. We emulate, we copy with the intent of replicating something, but the fact is that the result that comes from intention of copying or emulating or simulating is that we end up inevitably creating a version that is our own. If I try to be like Chris right now, I'm going to sound very different. I'm going to make an effort to sound and walk and be like him. But because I've got my own fingerprints, I've got my tone of voice, I've got my own stature, my composition is different, it's going to come across as a different version of Chris. But nevertheless, the intention is there, and it's served as a stepping stone, like your training wheels on bikes. This is what we're doing in this particular case with branding. We're looking at something we aspire to be, or somebody we aspire to be, to improve ourselves. And the process is not going to be exactly like the destination, but the midterm is going to end up being a better version of where we are right now, if that makes sense.
And just for all those out there that are confused, I'm Chris, that's Sim, just because I know. I mean, to be honest, when we do this, it pretty much gives it away. It's the branding buff. Yeah, right. Anyway, so identifying industry leaders and influencers. So look, in every industry, no matter where you are, there is always someone who's an influential figure in that industry or related field. So look at those leaders, look at the successful entrepreneurs in your industry, creative minds who are making an impact, study what they're doing, like what are their branding strategies, their content they're putting out, and their approach that they're taking to gain that inspiration. Like, why is it that you're finding them inspirational? Like, these are things to look at. And again, everything you just touched on is that we don't need to be them. We just need to find your version of that and see if you can live and breathe that and do that consistently. Because that's really with everything to do with branding. It's about consistently doing it.
Consistency. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and we all know this, like there's friends in our lives, there's people we know, like they have a brand, a personal brand as a human, let alone what they wear and things like that. But just there's things you just know that that's who they are. So if the police came knocking at your door and said, blah, 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 you'd be able to go, yes, this is what they're for. This is what they're about, all these kind of things, so that they could then maybe help track them down or find them or whatever the case be. So that's a great example of how this all comes together. With that, do you have any more on the identifying industry leaders and influencers?
I'm going to hold myself and leave this to the last point because it wraps it and brings it home. But let's go to number 4.
Yep. So contextualizing culture and society trends. So staying up to date with the current trends, both within your industry and the society at large. So identifying whether a cultural movement, emergence of technology, social shifts that align with your brand values. Consider how they can incorporate these to trends in your brand. So again, if you're in technology, this is something that's going to happen quite dramatically and quite often. If you're in other industries, this might be a slower burn, but they're things you need to be identifying within your industry, what they are, so that you don't go out, I don't know, talking about something and it's like that's what was happening years ago. Do you have an example of this?
I do have examples. You're speaking of those examples, and images are popping into my head. So what Chris is trying to say is be aware. Having awareness is very important. Again, on a personal level and on a business stage as well. Having awareness means not being the awkward one out. It's funny how if we look at especially Will Ferrell does this really, really well. He is so aware that he is able to break the social standard of awareness, create very awkward characters to bring into the movies, but doing it professionally well. So he's able to create that weird friend everybody's got who speaks out of place, says the wrong things, tries to be funny, ends up breaking his face because nobody got the joke or the punchline. This is about knowing the space around you and gaining awareness in terms of trends, in terms of culture, in terms of society, in terms of music, all these things. So you don't come out to the party and all of a sudden you notice that you're the weird one out. And there's nothing wrong with being weird as long as you own it. And when you own it, it means you're at a different, further stage than the stage we're talking about right now. Discovering who you want to be like and why involves having the discovery of awareness. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And in saying that though, another way to identify that is that like like you said, it was okay to be weird, but as long as you're the one laughing with them or at them, not being laughed at, because if you're being laughed at, that's clearly showing you're not quite with getting it. So
yes, and an interesting quick example of this was Purple Bricks. While it existed here in Australia, the real estate market had a standard, and Purple Bricks came, looked around, they saw the standard, broke it with a very intentional presence in terms of colors, in terms of visual identity, and in terms of their messaging. And they created a difference from the real estate standard norm.
Yeah,
that's it.
And I guess the same goes with even more recently here in Australia. We had the Karen brand. Have you heard about that? The restaurants. So there was a whole bunch of restaurants set up where they were called Karen, and it was all about you would go there and they would just break the PC. They would talk to you in a rude way. They'll go, and it was a great novelty. But
I remember now. Yes.
But recently they're all going into liquidation because unfortunately they didn't identify that the general public liked it as a thing, but not as like in reality. It's no fun. Like there has to be a balance in society.
Yes.
So, this was just another good example of good brand execution, but the market wasn't really ready for it, and it wasn't really an experience that people wanted to have consistently. So after the first time you went there, you weren't going back. So
that's correct.
That ongoing.
That's correct.
So these are things you got to be mindful of when you're talking about cultural and society trends. Now, this is something we love to do with our clients, and creating a mood board or a visual collage. It's a way to gather inspiration from various sources, such as creating a visual representation of your findings. So we generally ask clients to go find images, colors, typography, any visual element that resonates with their brand. So this mood board helps them visualize their brand's aesthetic direction, their feel, the features, and what it would feel like to be them. And it's a really interesting process we take clients through, because like I mentioned earlier, the client might put up Wolverine on the screen and say that it's Hugh Jackman that we want to be. Yeah. But it's like, well, hang on, do you want him to be
but the
like
character of Wolverine is completely diametrically opposed to what Hugh Jackman actually comes across in real life.
Real life, yeah. So, they're the kind of things when we work through the mood board that we try to get a deeper understanding of why you picked that picture. Or even recently, a client was saying that they love a particular font. And I was like, to them, I tried to explain that font was Helvetica, and that Helvetica is one of the most famous fonts in the world and pretty much used on anything. It wasn't unique to them. And that it was good that they chose it because it was familiar. It's something that people understood, and it was clearly a font that could communicate quite clearly, but it wasn't unique, and they needed to understand that. So
Yes,
there are some examples.
and this is always always good. And you can bring up the next slide, probably better to visually illustrate the execution of this exercise that we take our clients to. This is actually an interesting moment for many people because they've not done this before. They've thought about it to themselves. They've kept their thoughts to themselves, but never actually got to externalize it. Unless you're a coach or you've done some personal development, this is probably an exercise exercise that's going to be new to you. So when you're given the chance of naming those people that you've learned from or emulated to be before, and we're talking about, like, we have Michael Jordan on the screen right there. What kid hasn't picked up a basketball? And, well, maybe not so much today. Today, the reference might have been probably LeBron James.
Yeah.
But back in the day, what kid hasn't picked up a ball and immediately put himself in his imaginary world that he could be, or he wanted to be, like Michael Jordan? He's obviously collected enough information to relate to Michael Jordan and want to be the personification or his own version of what Michael Jordan has personified throughout his career, which is excellence. And some of us know that excellence came on the back of ruthlessness at times, but nevertheless, he was an icon of the sport that inspired billions of people. So just to give you an example of how this exercise can be more productive to you, and with the end in mind, that it is going to serve as a reference, and you don't need to be everything that those references are. You don't need to be dark skinned, or you don't need to be 6'6". You collect the things, the attributes that you want to take from them and adopt it in order for you to become that better brand than what you are right now.
Yeah, and you'll notice on the screen, if you are seeing this, if you're watching this on a podcast, we will put the notes there so you can see the visuals that we're talking to. But in Michael Jordan's case, for this particular scenario, the idea was that they loved that Michael Jordan was ruthless about excellence, right? So he wanted to, when this particular client was going down this pathway, he wanted to show that it has to be the best of the best. Like, you have to aspire and not just talk about it, but actually execute it and be ruthless towards that aspiration of being excellent at what you do. So all of these, as I said, we didn't just say, can you tell us someone you want to find? We've actually asked them, what was the meaning behind choosing that person? And can you do it in a few words? And that's what you're seeing on the screen, is some of those things where obviously, like Graham Norton may not be everybody's cup of tea, but what this client really liked about Graham Norton was he gave the no Fs. Like, he was just empowering guests and open. He loved that. And he said that's generally how he tries to approach everything he does. And knowing those things helps us develop the language, the brand sort of personality, some of the graphics that may come from that to illustrate that or make his life easier to communicate that on a consistent basis. So that's where this mood boarding can come into and make life easy for everyone. So is there anything we want to touch on with that one?
I will leave it for the last point because it brings it home and it ties it back to I think it was the third point that we had come up, which is emulate and differentiate. Conducting market research, the surveys, the focus groups to gather feedback from the target audience. Present the narrowed down list of personality words and evaluate their resonance with consumers. This helps ensure that the chosen words that you've put in the previous exercise before, that we just showed you, conveys the intended personality traits and resonates with the target audience. So the example that I would love to put on display right here is one that I've done at a workshop, one of the many events in personal development that I've attended, and it happened more than once. This is something that will be very interesting, and coaches know exactly what I'm talking about when we say emulation. Physical emulation actually puts us at a wave of frequency very similar to that of the emulated desire of object of desire. So in these workshops, we were instructed at some point to actually stand up from our seats, walk around the room, create some space, and think of somebody that we really want to be like. Obviously enough, Michael Jordan was my emulated object of desire. And for a while, I tried to understand the biomechanics of Michael Jordan in a way that I could physically emulate and simulate on myself, so that I could carry around myself in the room for long enough that I started embedding other feelings that came with feeling that assured about oneself, feeling that confident, and feeling that leadership upon your shoulders. Interestingly enough, what happens is that your brain starts adapting to the physical reality that it is living under at that particular point. And the longer you hold this physical state, obviously, the longer your brain will be influenced. At some point, it will no longer be an influence. It will be the permanent default state. So this exercise, I wanted to bring this up, and I didn't earlier, because it is at this point that is most relevant to say that you want to physically walk a mile in their shoes. Give yourself a timer, put a clock on, and do the exercise of walking around the house, knowing the information of who you want to emulate, and walk around the house in your head being that person. Interesting things will happen. I can promise you that.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess like this is not faking it to making it either. This is about emulation. So you're doing it to get yourself into a mindset, a zone, a way of being in your way. Because if you go too far with this and not believing what you're doing, it will come across as fake. So, you've got to do it with some kind of humility and integrity and, those kind of things. So,
step by step. You can't become an actor all of a sudden. We've talked about actors today. It takes years to get to a Hugh Jackman level of acting where he can sustain a character for 8, 10, 12 hours in a day for 3, 5, 7, 6 months, 7 months, so that he can hold enough of their features and properties that allows him to emulate them and be them for that duration of period.
But mind you, Sim, I am going to take you on to the court after this session and watch you with the siren just about to go with 2 seconds left. I look forward to seeing you emulate.
I think I will emulate Spider-Man at that point and jump out.
Probably, yeah. I guarantee it'll probably go over the board and onto the street. But you had to go. You had to try.
Yes.
All right. So, look, it's been a good session. I guess this leads to the coffee cup moment of, look, overall, identifying who a brand aspires to be like is an important step in developing this successful brand strategy. It helps you create a clear and consistent brand message, sets goals and benchmarks that differentiate the brand from its competitors, which is ideally what you're trying to achieve with all of this. Now, each week, what we do is we look at the brands that do this, because it's hard for us to obviously talk about Joe down the street. And I guess today we have given examples of our own personal journey with doing this, but what's always useful sometimes is to look at some brands. We're not saying this is exactly perfect, but it's just a good example of how brands go about it. So all of us can relate to the fact that there are some similarities between Tesla and its rise to where it is. And you can see that it is taking aspects of what Apple have done in its electronic manufacturing sort of vehicle sides, because it's showing ways that it's trying to develop brand loyalty. It's been quite innovative and it's creating a really strong fan base. So there are people right now that wouldn't even contemplate using any other electric car but Tesla. Even though it's its own entity, it's on its own thing, it's on its own field. I don't think, my understanding is that the BMWs and the Volkswagens and Mercedes-Benz cars that are electric-based are going, can we be compatible with Tesla? I don't believe that's the case. I don't think there's an industry standard there. But and also the fact that you're only seeing Tesla out there at the moment with those things. You don't have branded Mercedes-Benz stations. It's Tesla that we're seeing everywhere when it comes to plugging your car in, right? So So obviously it's looking at ways to create products that are not just functional, but obviously highly desirable and perceived as a status symbol. So anyone who is buying a Tesla these days feels like it's the one to own. I don't think there's any brand out there at the moment that if you own that electric car that people would give you some status quo because you've got that electric car over the Tesla.
Correct. I would agree. I don't even know off the top of my mind right now any other electric car brand, tell you the truth, but I'm sure there are.
And to be honest, it's because all those brands are brands that we know, but because they don't have a way to differentiate themselves from like their petrol cars, their diesel cars, there's a confusion in their own branding at this point. So another one that may be a bit obscure is the Airbnb being more like Amazon, because it's looking for a platform in short-term accommodation, but it looks to Amazon as its customer-centric approach. So it's looking for exceptional user experience, which is what we all know from, even though it's a bit big brothery with how Amazon do what they do, we feel like it's customized to us, and we feel like it's an experience that only Amazon can deliver because of the scope and scale they have. And Airbnb are approaching this. So they have a seamless booking experience. It's personalized with recommendation and has a wide range of offerings similar to Amazon's approach in e-commerce. So anyone that is booking through Airbnb, and I've been through this process, it is exactly that. It's for accommodation. So a great example of how two big brands have sort of found ways to sort of inspire each other. Another one is Spotify and Netflix. You can clearly see these two are doing it in different ways. One is a leading music streaming one, and obviously Netflix is doing it with curation of personal recommendations with the video that we watch, or movies and TV shows. So you can clearly see these two are the two leading personalized brands when it comes to this kind of curated way that we receive information. And I mean, I'm an Apple person, but I've stuck with Spotify because they seem to know how to put music in front of me that I want to listen to, where I find when I'm using Apple, it's not as curated. I feel like it is a little bit manufactured, and I've noticed that. And it's something I can't put my finger on, but it's just something that happens when you're in a mood and you just feel like you stay in that mood. When I'm listening to Spotify, I find with Apple, I'm in the mood for a couple songs, and all of a sudden I just seem to lose traction. It just seems to put something in that just doesn't feel. So the algorithm that the companies use clearly show that. So, and I was just touching on that algorithm at recommendation systems. It's tailored, it's engaging. It's similar to how when Netflix, and I know this because my partner, she has totally different Netflix taste. And when I open up her Netflix, I'm just like gobsmacked at like, did that even exist, or that show's there? Or
it's like visiting somebody's YouTube feed. It is completely different than what it would look like for yourself in your own computer.
Yeah, and then I get horrified when my kids have jumped onto my Apple TV and started watching YouTube, and you should see what pops up in my feed.
You see what comes up, yes.
Yeah, and the final brand we just want to touch on is Starbucks. So Starbucks, even though not so well known here in Australia for doing this, but globally that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to be the McDonald's of coffee, where you go anywhere in the world, and you just know that you're going to get the same experience with Starbucks wherever you are, and you're going to get that coffee. So McDonald's obviously been very successful at establishing itself everywhere in numerous countries. Starbucks have had maybe nowhere near the same success, but they have definitely tried the same strategy of replicating this on a global level, so that wherever you are in the world, you know there's going to be a Starbucks, and it's going to be there, and you can just go buy that coffee and know that it's going to be the same as home. If your home is America, basically.
which is why you find the core audience of the Starbucks being American, and this was definitely the case in Barcelona while I was living there. In a radius of less than 2 kilometers, there were 3 Starbucks. Three. And every time I stepped inside one of those Starbucks, because I loved their cheesecake, I was there for the coffee. I sat down and I realized immediately, oh, this is a lot of American sounding volume coming in, not your Catalans or your Spaniards in the regular language.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, and again, because unfortunately for America, Australia had developed its own coffee culture.
Yeah.
We didn't take it in that well because we had a cafe culture, but it wasn't a coffee culture. So we didn't just do it for the coffee. We went for the experience of the coffee at a location, and we had a particular way we did it. And that's why, again, Starbucks has not been as successful in Australia because we weren't competing. Like in America, the difference was they were dealing with that. I don't know, that you see it in every movie. There's a diner and the person brings out that mug of coffee and they just pour it into their cup.
Oh, yes,
like
that's
black tar,
right.
like
Yes.
so if that's been their experience and then they experience a latte, all of a sudden,
it doesn't cover it. It just doesn't do it justice. No,
exactly.
No.
Right. So again, it's sort of an example of where America's been built more on the Irish European side of things. We were built on sort of Italians and Greeks in that 60s period and they brought their coffee with them, and that's where we were able to take that to the next level. So great examples of how, again, the aspiration works. But anyway, we are getting on. We didn't beat our best total yet, but we are definitely pushing the almost 40-minute mark. So thank you for sticking with us if you're currently with us.
Yes.
And we really do appreciate you supporting us. And look, we're going to touch on another topic next week that's going to build on this one. I think it's the final one in our sessions on the purpose part, and we start getting into how we go about developing a brand by solving problems. So looking forward to that in a couple of weeks. But next week, look forward to having you back as we help you amplify your brand. And I guess, Sim, is there any final thank yous, sign-offs, anything you'd like to mention as we close today's session?
You said it all. Thank you for sticking through the first few minutes of stumbling up and down. Today's podcast didn't start in the same exact way, but it definitely finished on a high note. Thank you to everybody who's been in, and please let us know where you're listening to this from. We are always very curious to know, in whichever platform that is as well. Thank you.
So thank you again, and look forward to next week when we help you amplify your brand.